Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, fellow gamer. Welcome to episode 220 of Game Master's Journey. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. On this show, we discuss the craft and the art of game mastering. I've been running RPGs for over 26 years now, and I produce this show in the hopes that you can benefit from my experience, my triumphs, and my mistakes. So I hope that you will indulge me today for this episode. I am really happy to be bringing you a discussion episode today. This is normally what we do on this show, but in recent weeks, I have been working really hard trying to get caught up on releasing the actual play to you. So for the last actually couple months, I think, the feed has been dominated by actual play episodes. So I'm really excited to do a regular episode today. And I was actually originally going to do another one of my DMG episodes, but I have a lot more feedback that I've received recently that brought up some things that I would like to talk about on the show. And I also want to talk a little bit today about my new D&D supplement that I've just released. So I decided to put off the DMG episode for another week and just do kind of a micro topics episode where we're going to explore a few different RPG topics and talk about a few different things. And since I feel like it's been forever since I've done a discussion episode, and there are a lot of things I want to cover today, I hope that you can indulge me and bear with me today and allow me to just let my hair down a little bit, have a little fun with this episode. May go a little long today, but just crack open a beer, relax for this episode. We're going to kind of chill out a bit. We're going to kind of loosen the bonds that normally constrain us in this show. And I'm just going to have a little fun with this, and we'll see where this takes us. We'll kind of do this seat of our pants. And yeah, so, I just got to say, if you're one of those listeners that thinks that each episode is about one thing and you're annoyed if I don't talk about that one thing soon enough to your liking, I just want to remind you that many of my episodes are about more than one thing. It's actually relatively few of them that are only about one thing, and it's all on topic. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be in the show. So be patient if you're wanting to hear a specific thing. I'll get to it eventually, but this episode especially is not about one thing. We're going to cover a few different topics today. So some of those topics that we will hit today are, I'm going to tell you a bit about my Relics supplement for D&D I've just released. And I have some thoughts for you about organized play, especially organized play as one's first experience in the tabletop RPG hobby. A blast from the past, we're going to talk a little tiny bit about the Tyranny of Dragons campaign. It came up in some feedback, and it's been a long time since I talked about Tyranny of Dragons. So I just really quickly want to let you know about some resources that are available to you if you're running that campaign. And I'm sure some other topics will come up along the way as we go. All right, so first up on the show today, I have quite a few announcements, for lack of a better term, that I want to share with you today. So first of all, regarding the re-release of the old episodes of Game Master's Journey, as I've mentioned on the show previously, I am re-releasing all of the old episodes of Game Master's Journey. So for the past couple years, I think the older episodes have been available only to the patrons of Star Walker Studios and weren't available on the public website or in part of the public podcast feed. I have recently started re-releasing them, and this is episode 220 of the show, and I only had the 100 most recent episodes available. So that's like 120 episodes that I've had to re-upload to the website and get set up and everything. So it's taking time to do, and I can only do it, as I have free time. But I've made a lot of progress with it. So as of recording this episode today, I'm back to season 4 of the show, all the way back to episode 58. So episode 58 to episode 220 are now available for free to everyone. And honestly, by the time I edit and produce this episode and release it, I'll probably have even more episodes out, hopefully the rest of season 4. And I might even be into season 3 by the time you hear this. Now, my hosting provider that provides my website and hosts my podcast files, they only allow me to have 100 episodes in my RSS feed, in the podcast feed. So if you're listening to the show using an app like Dogcatcher, I think is one, Beyond Pod, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, whatever. If you're using something like that, you're only going to have access to 100 episodes. And those are the 100 most recent episodes and some of the Game Master's Journey's greatest hits episodes, some of the most popular episodes. So to listen to earlier episodes or episodes beyond those 100 that are in the feed, you're going to have to go to the website, starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey, and either download them from there or listen to them there. But they're there now. You can listen to them or download them all the way back to episode 58. Speaking of which, I've mentioned before on the show, there's been some problems with my website, and some people have been having problems downloading episodes, playing episodes on the site, or even getting episodes using their podcast app. I finally, I think, have that all fixed. I want to send a huge thank you and shout out to Jake from Squarespace, who worked with me on this and finally figured out what was going on and gave me a fix for it. Unfortunately, the fix involved me having to re-upload all of the episodes. Now, fortunately, I was re-uploading a lot of episodes anyway because I'm re-releasing them. But I had to re-upload them all, and I finally got that caught up. So that's one reason it's been taking me a little longer than I'd hoped to re-release all the episodes. But all the problems on the website should be fixed from episode 58 of the show on. So you should be able to get the episode in your app if it's part of the feed again, if it's one of those 100 episodes. Otherwise, you should be able to download it from the site, and the audio player should now be working on the site. You should be able to play the episode right on the website, any episode from 58 on. The audio player is kind of weird. When you press play, it loads or buffers the file, but there's nothing that tells you that it's doing that. So sometimes you hit play and nothing happens right away and you think it's not working. Especially like the actual play episodes, which are pretty big files. It might take a minute or so for it to buffer. So once you hit play, just wait. And once it buffers, it'll start playing and you can go from there. But they should be working. And as I re-upload the old episodes, I'm fixing this as I go. So at this point, any episode that's on the site that you can access should work. So if you do have any problems downloading an episode from the site or playing an episode on the player on the site, please let me know. And please let me know which specific episode you're having problems with, what app you're using, or what exactly, if you're trying to download it on the site or what you're trying to do. And I should be able to fix it. Jake has helped me kind of make some changes to my workflow that I should be able to fix these. And, I've been, I've re-uploaded over 100 episodes and it's a lot of messing with the code and stuff. So it's very possible that I screwed something up somewhere and one of them maybe doesn't work. So if you find something that doesn't work, please let me know and I can and I will fix it ASAP. So I want to thank you for your patience. For those of you that were having problems accessing episodes, thank you for your patience, and I apologize for the inconvenience. The timing was very unfortunate because this happened right about the time I had Matt Colville back on the show, and it was no surprise to me that I got a sudden surge of new downloads and new subscribers when Matt came on the show, and it's unfortunate that this happened about them, and so probably a lot of new listeners were having problems and were like, what the hell is going on with this podcast? I assure you, this is not the way things normally work at Star Walker Studios. I've been doing the show for over 3 years, and I've never had a problem like this. But Squarespace, I think, made some changes on their back end that affected the way I was uploading files and how I was putting things together on the website. And some things that I was doing before that worked fine now no longer work because of the changes they made. So we got it fixed. We found a new way to do things so everything works. So if you're a fellow podcaster that uses Squarespace and you're having similar problems with your audio files not playing or people not being able to download things, feel free to reach out to me and I can let you know what we figured out as far as how to make this work. So once I've re-released the rest of the Game Master's Journey episodes, I'm then going to re-release the GM Intrusions episode. So GM Intrusions was the parent podcast of this podcast, the precursor to this podcast that I did for a couple years. It was very similar to Game Master's Journey, just where Game Master's Journey tends to focus on D&D a lot, especially in recent years. GM Intrusions was focused on Numenera, but it was very much the same kind of podcast about GMing and things like that. So I am re-releasing those as well. And there's, I think, 77 or something like that episodes of GM Intrusions. So once you're caught up on Game Master's Journey, you can check out GM Intrusions as well. And again, as far as why I'm doing this, I went into this in more detail. I think it was on episode 213. So you can check that out for a more detailed explanation. But in a nutshell, I had this limitation of 100 items in my RSS feed anyway. So I couldn't have all the episodes in the actual feed anyway. And so I thought that having the older episodes available to patrons would be a cool perk for patrons and maybe would inspire or motivate more people to become patrons in a way to help support this project that I'm doing and be able to do more in the future. And, I've done it for a couple years and looking at my data, I just didn't see any significant impact that effectively putting episodes behind a paywall had as far as the number of patrons I had or the amount that the Patreon was bringing in. So I decided that the benefit wasn't worth the cost. And the cost is namely for newer listeners who haven't been with the show since the beginning. You guys had to become a patron to hear the older episodes. So I decided, I tried it. I gave it the college try and it didn't perform the way I'd hoped. So I would rather have those episodes available to everyone, especially to new listeners, because I believe that they are a resource for new GMs and all GMs really. So I'd rather have that out there for people and find other better ways to support the show and my other RPG endeavors. So as you probably assuredly know, I've been putting out a lot of actual play episodes lately for my Hinterlands of Elandria campaign. And my intent is not for this show to become an actual play podcast solamente. It's not my intent to even have most of the episodes be actual play episodes. This is something I'm doing because I had quite a few listeners request an audio version. And indeed, now that I've been doing the audio episodes, I compare my metrics on YouTube versus my metrics on the podcast. And there are way, way, way more people listening to the actual play in the podcast than there are watching it on YouTube. So I think it was definitely a good move as far as that goes. But the reason there's been so many is because I had been running the campaign for quite a while and putting the videos out on YouTube for quite a while before I decided to put them in a podcast form, in an audio form on Game Master's Journey. We started this campaign, I believe, in September of 2017, to give you an idea of how long we've been playing. So I've been cranking out the actual play, just trying to get caught up so that, we're not super far behind where we are on the YouTube channel. So as of now, as of recording this today, we have played 11 sessions of the campaign, not counting the preludes and vignettes. And we're scheduled to play our 12th session later this week. And I have the videos on YouTube for sessions 1 through 10. And now, as of this episode, we have the audio versions in Game Master's Journey for sessions 1 through 10 as well. So at this point, we are caught up to the YouTube channel, which is awesome. So I hope to get sessions 11 and 12 into the feed within the next few weeks. And right now, my focus as far as the actual play is going to be on the audio version. So I'm going to worry about getting the audio version done and out to you before I worry about the video version, again, because I'm seeing many more people listening to the audio version than I am watching it on YouTube. So that's obviously where my focus should be. But at least as of now, I am planning to continue producing videos of the actual play on my YouTube channel as well. But I'll just get caught up with those as I have time and work on producing the audio versions first. I'm also planning to do another behind the screen episode soon, which is where I discuss the campaign from the GM's perspective and answer questions about the campaign and try to explain what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and why I'm doing it. So if you have any questions or comments about Hinterlands of Elandria that you would like me to cover in the next behind the screen episode, please let me know as soon as possible. The best way to do that is to comment on the relevant video on my YouTube channel. But if you prefer, you could also send me an email at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Really anything goes. If you're listening to or watching the actual play and you have a question about why did Lex do that, or why didn't he do this, or how did he feel about this thing that happened, or what did he think about this thing that player said, anything like that, feel free to ask me. That's exactly the kind of stuff I want for behind the screen. I really would prefer for the behind the screen episodes to be all me responding to your comments and questions so that you're in control about what I'm talking about on behind the screen, because the whole point of behind the screen is to help other GMs to kind of pull back the curtain and show what this GM is doing and what this GM is thinking when it comes to preparing the game, running the game, and then reacting to what happens in the game. So the best way for that to work, the way for it to be the most useful to you is for you to give me questions and comments. So I'm talking about what you want to hear me talk about. I'm also very excited to announce that I was recently a guest on another RPG podcast called Crit Academy. And I was really happy to get invited to that show. It's been a while since I've gotten to be on someone else's podcast. So that was a lot of fun. And we talked quite a bit about Primordia and world building in general and all kinds of RPG stuff. So I'll have a link to that episode in the show notes for this episode at starwalkerstudios.com. And you can go check out Crit Academy and you can hear me talk about Primordia and world building and check out the rest of their episodes. They've covered a lot of topics. Their show is similar to this show in that they talk a lot from the GM's perspective, but they talk quite a bit from the player's perspective too. Recently, they've been doing a series of episodes where they've been going through all of the new subclasses in Xanathar's Guide and kind of digging into them one by one. A whole series of episodes on that, which is super cool. They've also done world building episodes. And in every episode, they come up with ideas for new variants on monsters, magic items, encounters you could use in your game, all kinds of stuff. Really great stuff. They do really great stuff over there at Crit Academy. So definitely check them out and tell them I sent you. So hopefully I can have those guys on this show sometime in the near future. I am in the mode of thinking about doing some more interviews. Now that we're finally getting caught up on the actual play, I have time to get back to other things like our series on the Dungeon Master's Guide. I want to return to our series on the Plains and do some more interviews. I want to give a huge thank you and a shout out to some new patrons who've joined Starwalker Studios. So thank you very much to Robert, Tony, and Nicholas. I really appreciate your patronage and couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. All right. And my final announcement today, this is the one I'm most excited about. I'm so excited to tell you guys this today. Relics of Power is done. It's finished. It's available. You can go buy it right now at starwalkerstudios.com/store. And I'm super excited to see what people think of this. So what is Relics of Power, you ask? So Relics of Power is my second self-published D&D supplement. The first one was The Trickster's Labyrinth, which was an adventure. So Relics of Power is a supplement that introduces a new class of magic item into the game, which I call relics. And relics can actually be pretty much any kind of magic item, or at least any kind of permanent magic item. So it could be a magic weapon, magic armor, a magic shield, a magic wand, a staff, a rod, a ring, some kind of wondrous item, really anything. Consumable items don't work so well for relics, so scrolls and potions don't really work. But any kind of permanent item can be a relic, and a relic is simply a magic item that its properties change depending on the level of the player character wielding it. And the idea is that these items grow in power over time as the person wielding them grows in power over time. So I've been using relics in my game since the second edition days back in the 90s when I first started playing and running D&D. And I've used them in third edition and I use them in fifth edition now. I really like them. It's something I've always done. And honestly, I'm surprised it's not a thing in the DMG. We've had supplements in the past. I think in third edition, they had a supplement that was something similar to this. I think they were called Legacy Weapons or Weapons of Legacy or something. Or maybe that was Pathfinder. I think it was third edition. But anyway, we've seen this idea before in D&D, I'm pretty sure. It's not like I just came up with this out of nowhere. But for some reason, it's not in the DMG. It's not like a core part of the game. And, you might wonder, well, why do we need something like that? It sounds overly complicated. Well, first of all, they're not overly complicated. They're actually really simple. But as far as why you might need something like that, the whole idea of a relic is so that you can give a player character a magic item and you can continue to improve that magic item over time so that the player never feels like they need to or want to replace that magic item with something better. In fifth edition, we can only have 3 attuned items, right? So especially when you get to higher levels, there's a lot of competition for which 3 items are going to be the ones that I have that I can attune to. You can't just have everything under the sun necessarily. So, maybe your character has a magic sword that he got, I don't know, in 6th level or something. Maybe it's like a flame tongue or something, or maybe it's just like a +1 sword. And it's a really nice sword. Maybe it's something he has to attune to. And then later on, he finds a better sword, like, I don't know, a Vorpal sword or something, so he swaps them out, right? He upgrades, right? And then as a GM, you have to wonder, well, what do we do with this other magic weapon? Because, magic weapons or magic items in general are supposed to be special and rare and wondrous things. And they kind of lose that when you have extras laying around that you don't want and you're giving them to minions or you're selling them to NPCs or they're just sitting in a bag of holding, collecting dust. So I see that personally is not great. There's also instances where a player, for their concept, they want to have some kind of special item that's special to their character at the very beginning, maybe an ancestral weapon or suit of armor, or maybe some magic item that's been handed down through their family for generations, or just some item that's a core part of their character concept that they want to start out with. And not just an item that they want to start out with, but an item they want to be part of their character for their entire career. And that's where relics really come in. Relics aren't for an item just to give you some kind of bonus, or an item just to be some cool thing you found. They're for items that are part of your character, that are as much a part of your character as your class, or, what languages you speak, or what background you picked, or whatever. That's a core part of that character concept of how you picture that character as a player. So, if you have something like that, whether it's an ancestral weapon or whatever, you want to have that single item through your whole career. But you also, from a more gameplay perspective, or a more mechanical perspective, you want that item to be relevant for your whole career as well. If I come up with this really cool character concept where I have this ancestral sword, and so the GM gives me a +1 sword at first level, that's my ancestral sword, I don't want to be punished for having that cool idea by the fact that when I'm a 20th level fighter, or whatever I am, I'm still running around with a +1 sword while everyone else in the party has legendary items, right? Like in that scenario, I feel like I'm getting punished by the DM because I came up with this really cool concept that let me have a magic weapon at the very beginning. So relics address all this because the DM can give you a magic item that's appropriately powered for whatever the DM wants you to have right now, but leaves the window open in the future for that item to grow in power as you do. So you don't have to worry about, I need to find a replacement for this, or, every other sword I come across that's magical is going to be tempting me to replace this item that I really see as a core part of my character. So this supplement does a few things for you. It tells you how you can create these relics yourself from scratch, from the ground up. You can make a relic. You can define, this is the properties this item has at these different levels. It also tells you how you can take an existing magic item from the DMG, like a legendary item, and convert it into a relic. So the example I give in the supplement is, let's say you have a player playing a paladin, and they have this idea of they wield their ancestral sword, and you want them to one day have a Holy Avenger, but you don't want to give them a Holy Avenger at first level. You could take the Holy Avenger and convert it into a relic, so you can give them that sword at first level. But at first level, it doesn't have the full powers of Holy Avenger. It has abilities that are more appropriate for a magic item that a first level character would have. And then I actually use the Holy Avenger as an example. I show you how you can take that and break it down into, this is what this weapon can do at different levels. And then the third thing that the supplement does for you is it provides a dozen of these relics to you that you can use in your game, and also as further examples of how this works. As a lot of thing in game design, and I think especially when designing for 5th edition, designing these relics is as much an art as it is a science. So there's a lot of discussion in there about making judgment calls and balancing the items, and I kind of walk you through that whole process. So I think this will be a really useful supplement to a lot of GMs. It can work in any D&D game. It doesn't matter what setting you're playing in, whether it's one of the official published settings or it's a setting of your own creation. This is a setting neutral supplement. It's got nothing to do with the setting, so you can use it anywhere. And it's going to be especially great for DMs running campaigns where they would rather hand out fewer magic items but make them more meaningful, or in a campaign where the DM wants one or more characters to have a magic item that's really iconic to their character that they can have throughout their entire adventuring career, not just at the end of it at high levels. and also for players that have character concepts like that. So I think this is a supplement that's going to appeal to a lot of people. So as I said, this is available for sale now at starwalkerstudios.com/store. Also there you can find my adventure, The Trickster's Labyrinth. And for a limited time, I'm running a sale on a bundle. So if you'd like to get The Trickster's Labyrinth and Relics of Power, you can get them together and save a couple bucks. Also, Relics of Power, it's a digital product. It's a PDF, and you will get the full color PDF that's really nice if you're going to use it on like a digital device. But I also provide you with a printer friendly version if you're going to actually print the thing out. So it's not going to use so much of your printer's ink if you decide to print it out. And I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my wife, Nikki, who did the cover art for Relics of Power and did the design and the layout for it. And it looks really great. And thank you so much, Nikki, for that and for all you do. I know it was a lot of work and took a lot of time, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys like it. And I hope you let Nikki know if you like the art. I also want to give a shout out and thank you to Brett and Danielle, who looked over early review copies of it for me and helped me find some typos, as well as point out areas where maybe things were a little unclear. Because something that's really important to me with this supplement is that I'm showing you how to do this for yourself. You know, I don't want you to have to come to me to give you relics to use in your game. I want you with this document to be able to create your own relics and run with it. And in the spirit of that, I hope that those of you that get this and do make your own relics, that you'll share them with us on our forum, because I'd love to see them, and I'm sure the other listener GMs would love to see them as well. So check it out, Relics of Power on sale now, or you can get it in a bundle with the Trickster's Labyrinth. And really, you know, if you're wanting to support Game Master's Journey, if you're wanting to support my RPG endeavors, this is the number one way you can do so. I would really, really love to publish more products like this in the future. And I'd love to do more and more when it comes to writing and designing RPG supplements for you. And, you know, the most encouraging thing is to see copies sell and see that there's interest in that and in what I'm doing. And I hope to do more in the future. Back in episode 213, I shared some feedback with you from listener GM Tony, who was having some issues with one or more of the players at his table. And I gave some advice as best I could on how to deal with that. And you can refer back to episode 213 if you'd like to hear more about that. And since then, I've gotten a follow-up email from Tony, kind of giving me a little more information and giving me an update on his progress. And I thought I'd share some of this with you today. So Tony says, I just listened to episode 213 and I was super excited to hear that you addressed my email in the Q&A section. Your advice has been terrific, and I'm going to stick to my guns in order to provide the kind of experience that I think D&D is designed to, and that I want to create for my players. Good for you, Tony. Glad to hear it. I'm not sure if my friend listens to your show, but I'm sure I'll be found out if he does. Tony's friend, if you're listening to the show, please don't be angry or offended. We are using this as a teaching moment for other GMs as far as how to deal with players, how to deal with the other human beings at your table. I've been doing this show for 3 years now, and probably the number one question I get from listener GMs has something to do with this concept of dealing with the other people at your table. It doesn't have to do with the game or the mechanics or anything like that or role playing. It has to do with the interpersonal dynamics of the people at the table, and how do we handle conflicts that come up, or what do we do when maybe a player is doing something we don't appreciate or whatever. And it just comes up a lot. And it's probably, as a GM, it's probably honestly the most challenging part of being a GM. And it's the thing that our game books talk the least about. So it's a very relevant topic to the show. And it's really helpful to a lot of people, I think, to talk about this stuff. So, I mean, I'm sure Tony doesn't mean anything personal. I know I don't mean anything personal. So yeah, I hope we can all kind of take this in the spirit that it's given and use it as just an example, even somewhat hypothetical, probably, because I don't know Tony or the other people involved, just to talk about. So Tony goes on to say, as far as the player is concerned, he is a good friend, because I kind of wondered, because a lot of times your options, or how you want to handle some kind of interpersonal conflict that occurs at the table, a lot of times that's, if not determined, it's somewhat influenced by what kind of a relationship do you have with these people. It's going to be different if you're good friends outside of the game than if this is just someone you play D&D with and that's the only time you ever talk to them. So Tony says he is a good friend and we play many games together other than D&D. So that's good to know. So unfortunately, because of that, I think a lot of the advice I gave in episode 213 may not help Tony a whole lot, because a lot of the things he was talking about were things that I wouldn't want to deal with as a GM from a player. If it was anything more than me saying something to the player and that's the end of it, I wouldn't want to deal with it. So I was, advising Tony that maybe he just find a different player if he can't work this out. But, this is one of those situations where when you're good friends outside of the game, that may not be an option, or you want to avoid that option. That's like the worst case scenario kind of thing. So we have to explore other options. And Tony mentioned in his email that, his friend is fairly new to gaming and has expressed interest in running a game himself. And so I think that's great. And really the number one way to improve a player, whether they're a good player or a not so good player, is for them to run a game themselves, because a lot of the behaviors that we see in players that we don't like go away as soon as they run a game themselves, because they realize, they spend a day in the GM shoes and they realize how much work it is and how difficult it is. And they realize how different things that players do can really make your job a lot harder as a GM, can really suck the fun out of it for you as a GM. And just seeing things from that different perspective, from the GM's perspective, is really an eye-opener for players. And I found almost every single instance in my experience that a player GMs for the first time, they end up being a better player afterwards, if only because they understand better where the GM is coming from and they appreciate more what the GM is doing. So they try a little bit harder not to be a dick. So I don't think that's something I hit on in episode 213, but if you're a GM having problems with a certain player and you want to keep the player in the group, maybe consider seeing if you can get that player to run a one shot or a short little campaign themselves. And just that may do wonders the next time they're the player at the table as far as how they behave. All right. So Tony goes on to say, while I've watched about 10 episodes of Critical Role with Matt Mercer, I have very little experience sitting at the table as a player. So I have just a few hours of play time to reality check what should or should not be happening in D&D games. Your insights have been totally helpful and have given me things to think about as a new DM. Yeah. So that's a thing, when you don't really have a frame of reference, when you're new to the hobby, you don't really know what's normal, what's not normal, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And unfortunately, although shows like Critical Role are highly entertaining, they're not really a good barometer for what you're D&D game session should look like. Unless you happen to be playing with a bunch of actors or voice actors, your game session isn't going to look anything like Critical Role. And that's okay. Your game session shouldn't look anything like Critical Role. So yeah, you gotta, things like that, you gotta take it with a grain of salt. You gotta understand that you're watching something with professional actors who they do this for a living. They play parts for a living, and playing a D&D character is playing a part. It's produced, and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes as far as to coordinate the players and what they're doing and whatnot. You're just seeing a very small glimpse of what's really going on. So be really careful comparing your game session to something like Critical Role, because it's really apples and oranges, right? It'd be like comparing your D&D game to like a drama on TV and saying, oh, our characterization isn't as good as it is in Jessica Jones or whatever. And it's like, well, of course it's not. There's a team of writers working on Jessica Jones. They have very talented actors working on that show. It's a huge pool of talent, putting in a lot of man hours, or human hours, we should say, to do that, way more than what you're putting into your game. So it's apples and oranges. It's not fair to compare the two, really. So I think something like Critical Role is an excellent way to get someone excited about the hobby, to show them this is kind of the ideal of what this hobby can be. But really, that's to my mind, that's really all it's good for as far as that goes, is just to get people excited about it and say, hey, this looks like something I'd like to try. As far as going beyond that and using it as a teaching tool or a way to figure out what to expect from your game session, I don't think it's terribly useful, because your game session isn't going to be like that. And just a quick aside, as a teaching tool, I deal with this a lot because I put my games on YouTube and I get comments and whatnot from people that watch Critical Role. Sometimes something you should understand if you watch Critical Role is they're playing D&D 5th edition, but in a way they're not playing D&D 5th edition. They're using a lot of rules from Pathfinder. They're using a lot of homebrewed stuff. And a lot of the things they're doing with the D&D 5th edition system is a way it was done in a previous edition, or a way it's never been done in D&D. But, definitely if you're a GM wanting to understand how the system works, Critical Role is not what you want to watch, because you're going to learn a lot of, quote, wrong things, because they're using Pathfinder rules, they're using homebrew rules. They're not running it, quote, by the book, which is fine. I'm not casting a judgment on that. People can run their games however they want. But so many times I get comments from people on YouTube or whatever who think the rules work a certain way because that's how they do it in Critical Role. And it's like, no, that's not actually how the rules work. That's how they do it on Critical Role, which is, it's kind of its own thing. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. All right. So Tony goes on to talk about how his friend and him went to a game convention, and they played an Adventurers League game. And he talks about this adventure they played for the Adventurers League, which is the organized play for Dungeons and Dragons. And he says the games he played in consisted of the DM reading something like 4 paragraphs from the adventurer's background, which I'm sure was not fun, giving the players a very specific task, very railroaded, in other words, throwing some monsters at them, and then having them return to the starting area, and then awarding a ton of XP and gold, passing out official event magic item vouchers, and so on. And so basically what he's saying is, this was him and his friends' kind of first experience with D&D and with RPGs in general, and how it kind of gave them this impression of, oh, we should play a 3-hour session, and then we should gain multiple levels, get tons of gold, get lots of magic items, just all this stuff being handed out like candy. And so this is another, I think, apples and oranges comparison, comparing an Adventurers League game or an other organized play game with what, your home game might look like or will probably look like. I've played D&D Adventurers League. I've played the Pathfinder Society, which is Pathfinder's organized play. And I have to say, pretty much all of the experiences were not great. And I would rather, I would rather play online with friends. I'd rather play at home with friends. I'd honestly rather play a video game than play an organized play game. It's just not my cup of tea. Some people love it, and that's great if that's you. But in my experience, organized play, there's little to no role playing. There's little to no character development. There's little to no focus on story. It's very mechanical. It's very much like you're playing a miniatures war game. It's very railroady. Creative problem solving and creative thought is not encouraged and is often actually discouraged by the adventure, by the game master, and just by the structure of the whole thing itself. And the way that experience and treasure and magic items are handled are nothing like the way you would do it in your home game. So for that to be your first experience, again, it's kind of like the Critical Role thing. If that's what it takes to get you excited about the hobby or to introduce you to it so that you're going to explore it further, then that's awesome. But it's not a great way to set your barometer as far as what you should expect from a private game that you play in, because it's not going to be anything like an Adventures League game, or at least I hope it isn't for your sake. So it's easy to see how you have this player who only has experience with organized play and they think that's the way things are. And then they play in a home game and you're having to play multiple sessions to gain a level. You're playing maybe multiple weeks or even months before you get a magic item. There's more focus on character development and story and role playing and things like that. And it's not just wall-to-wall combat and moving miniatures on a grid. And it's a very different experience, right? It can be night and day. And if you're someone who liked the organized play experience, then you may not like the more, quote, traditional RPG experience, playing, privately under a GM that actually has the power to do whatever the hell they want, and they're not answering to someone above them telling them how to run the game. And also my experience with organized play has been, the GMing usually isn't that great. It's either that just the GM isn't that great, or what I think is more often the truth is the GM may be fantastic, but they're so constrained by the structure of the organized play and what they can and can't do. And the fact that I have to run this adventure in this amount of time and we have to hit these beats and blah, 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 that it leads to a game that's not nearly as satisfying as if that GM could just run a game however they want. The adventures, at least in my experience, aren't great. They're very two-dimensional or even one-dimensional. They're very combat focused. And the players that you get at those tend to be your min-maxers and your power gamers. And, you'll hear a lot of discussion about people's bonuses and their feats and their character builds. And you'll hear very little in-character role playing or trying to develop a character or get to know the other characters or anything like that. And also another part of organized play is usually there's different people at the table every time. So you don't get the group dynamic and synergy that you see in something like Critical Role with people who game together all the time and who build a relationship in and out of character. So it's just a very different experience. I think it's an inferior experience. So, that can definitely mess with your calibration of expectations if that's all you have experience with. Now, I hope I don't get a lot of irate emails from people defending organized play. I do believe it has its place. It's a great way to introduce people to the hobby. If you're running at a convention or something like that, you're constrained just because of the time limit and things like that. So, the organized play is less onerous in a convention because you're going to have to deal with some of those constraints anyway. So, I'm not saying it's terrible all the time and you should never do it. But I do, what I usually say is, if you want to try organized play to see if the hobby's for you, that's awesome. It's an easy way to kind of dip your toe in and see if you like it. But if you like it, find yourself an actual group to play with that's not organized play, that's not playing in a game store. because you'll have way more fun than you're ever going to have in an organized play game. At least that's been my experience. So I suggested to Tony, knowing all this, knowing that they had this organized play experience that kind of set the stage for them, I think a lot can be resolved in this situation by just having a heart-to-heart conversation with the player, and especially knowing that they're friends outside of the game. It makes this even easier. Have a beer together, have a coffee together, whatever you do, and just talk about it and just say, hey, I understand that we did this organized play and we expect certain things because that's the way it was, but I don't want that kind of experience. I think I want to do something different, and I think that you'll find this a lot more fun than the organized play experience once you give it a try, and then explain these are the ways, my game is going to be different than what we saw in the organized play. You're going to level more slowly. There won't be magic items right away, or whatever those differences are. And I think if you make that clear ahead of time, and you let the player know that the reason you're doing it this way is because you think the experience will be better in the long run, I think they'll be on board if they're a reasonable person. So Tony goes on to say that he's going to be running the Tyranny of Dragons campaign. And I just wanted to really quickly let you know, listener GM, and I let Tony know, a little bit of my thoughts about Tyranny of Dragons. I ran the campaign myself. Well, I ran the first book, which is Hoard of the Dragon Queen, and I ran the beginning of the second book, Rise of Tiamat, and I streamed that. So if you're interested in watching those, you can find them on my YouTube channel, those videos. So, this is really quick, but in a nutshell, here's my advice on running Tyranny of Dragons. First of all, I would recommend using Milestone XP if you run Tyranny of Dragons. In the first book, Hoard of the Dragon Queen, you're given the option to either use Milestone XP or use Encounter-based XP, and it's kind of left up to you to decide how you want to do that. If you use Milestone XP, you're given guidelines as far as here are the milestones, here are when the character should level. The thing is that they don't tell you in Hoard of the Dragon Queen is that in the second book, Rise of Tiamat, it assumes you're using Milestone XP, and there is zero support for using Encounter-based XP in the second half of the campaign, Rise of Tiamat. In fact, not only is there no support for it, but it's not going to work. If you try to do Encounter-based XP, there's nowhere near enough XP in that adventure. You're going to have to add a lot of extra stuff to get the player characters to the levels they need to be to do the various things in the adventure, or you're going to have to be just handing out tons of XP for free, at which point, why don't you just do the Milestone XP anyway? So my advice, save yourself a ton of headache and just do Milestone from the beginning for the whole campaign. It just makes it all a lot easier. Also, I have a post on my blog at starwalkerstudios.com about Tyranny of Dragons. It's a review of it, and it's also a rebuttal, because at the time people were really bagging on Tyranny of Dragons a lot, and it does have a lot of problems. Mainly, it has a lot of editorial and some game balance problems because it was being developed at the same time that 5th edition was being developed. So they didn't have the final copy of the 5th edition rules for much of the development cycle for Tyranny of Dragons. And honestly, there's just a lot of editorial oversight. Like the editors really dropped the ball on it. I mean, there's a lot of problems, but it is a cool story. And if you want to run it, those problems are, you can surmount those problems. So in that post, I give links to a lot of great resources, as well as errata and things like that help you with the various problems people have found in the adventure and give you solutions. So you can check out that post. I'll have a link to it in the show notes for this episode at starwalkerstudios.com. All right, and my final piece of advice when it comes to Tyranny of Dragons, I can't advise you about the end of the campaign because I didn't finish it, but there is a chapter, I think it's in the first book, where for the entire chapter, the player characters are with a caravan, and it's terrible. I tried to do it. So if you want to see a group suffer through it, you can watch my actual play on YouTube. And in retrospect, if I ran the campaign again, I would just skip that chapter. I would do a travel montage for the whole caravan thing, and handle it in like 10 or 15 minutes of, telling the player characters what happened, maybe asking them a few questions about what they did about X, Y, or Z, and then move on. To do it the way they present it in the book, it's dreadfully boring. It's a slog, and you will all get burnt out on this campaign in this chapter, most likely, if you don't somewhere else. So I really recommend skipping it, just hand waving it, doing a montage, and just giving them a milestone or making up the XP in some other way to keep the advancement where it is. But yeah, definitely skip that caravan part. It sucks. It's super boring. And it just killed the momentum of the campaign. So Tony went on to talk about he's using something like my relics I came up with. He's using some magic items that the player characters get at the beginning, that they will be able to unlock powers from in the future, which sounds super awesome. So thank you so much for the follow-up email, Tony. And, I hope that this discussion continues to be helpful to you, and I hope it's helpful to other listener GMs as well. I got an email from listener GM John, and John says, I've been listening since about episode 124, and I enjoy the podcast very much. I especially like how most of the topics of discussion on the podcast are essentially system universal, discussing GM style, prep, adventure building, world building, etc. Now that I'm caught up, I'm going back to earlier episodes or episodes that I skipped originally. So that's awesome. And, John, I'm really glad to hear that you're finding the show useful for kind of a generic RPG podcast. The big reason I started Game Master's Journey and retired GM Intrusions was because I didn't want to be stuck always talking about a single game. I talked about Numenera for a couple years on GM Intrusions, and at the time, felt like I'd really said everything I had to say about Numenera. And, I probably have more to say about it now. So we may do some Numenera episodes in the future, but I started playing D&D more, and I wanted to be able to talk about the game I was playing and not be, always limited to a particular game. So I started Game Master's Journey to be a show where I just talk about GMing in general and use whatever game I'm currently running or playing for examples for discussion, which is what I've been doing. But in recent years, that discussion has been primarily D&D 5th edition focused, just because that's what I'm running right now. That's what I'm playing right now. And, as you know, I'm building a world for D&D. So I'm not really interested in running another game. Unfortunately, I only have time to run one game a week as it is. And sometimes I don't even have time to run one game a week. So unfortunately, running multiple campaigns just isn't in the cards for me right now, although I'd love to do it. So I can only run one game at a time. And, right now that game's D&D. I'm in the middle of a campaign right now. It's going to be a long reaching campaign. I hope to get to level 20 and beyond. So I'm going to be running D&D for the foreseeable future. So it only makes sense to talk about the game I'm actually running, because that's what's in my head right now. That's what I'm familiar with. And as you've probably noticed listening to the show, if you listen very long at all, I get really into the mechanics of the game. And I'm very much a systems mastery kind of guy. But that's difficult to do with multiple games at one time. So I tend to get very steeped in one game at a time. And I know that game inside and out. I know the mechanics left, right, backwards and forwards. And I can run it, and I don't have to look stuff up all the time. And I feel really comfortable with it. It might be possible to do that with more than one game at once, but I think it would be a lot more difficult, and it would take a lot more time that I just don't have, unfortunately. So for instance, Numenera, I would love to run Numenera again. I just don't have the time to do it. And as far as playing in games, I'm playing in a campaign right now. I'm playing in a D&D campaign, and it's really all the time I have to play in a campaign. So, maybe someday in the future I'll play Numenera or some other game, or maybe someday in the future I'll run some other game. But for right now, it's D&D. So I'm happy that people who are playing games other than D&D are still finding this show useful, because that's really what I want. And I believe that 99% of the stuff we talk about is relevant to any game you're playing or running. So I'm glad that I'm not the only one that believes that. And, since we're just letting our hair down in this episode anyway, I'll say, every once in a while I'll get someone who, suggests a new game to me. And, again, it's the same catch-22. It's like, yeah, game X sounds cool, and I might like to try game X, but in order to try game X, I have to stop playing something that I'm already playing, which right now would mean I'd have to stop playing D&D, or I'd have to stop running D&D. Neither of which are things that I want to do. Now maybe, this campaign I'm playing in, we're like 17th level now. So I don't know how long Brett, the GM, is planning to run the campaign. I don't know, if he has an end point in sight. But seeing that we're 17th level, I mean, I would guess that the end point isn't terribly far off. So, maybe when that campaign's over, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if Brett's going to run something else, or one of the other guys is going to run something, who knows what happens at that point. But at least until that happens, like, I don't really have time to play another game. And until I finish Hinterlands of Elandria, I don't have time to run another game. And let's face it, if I'm going to run another big campaign, it's probably going to be in Primordia, unless I just get sick of it, because it's like, I'm spending all this time and energy building this world. Why would I go, play something like Star Wars, where now I have to build a whole new world and learn a whole new system, when I've already got something that works for me. And that's especially true when it comes to other fantasy games. Like, someone posted recently, Pathfinder announced they're doing a second edition. And it's like, I have zero interest in second edition Pathfinder. Nothing against you if you play it or run it or you want to play it. That's awesome. But to me, it's like, why on earth would I play I already play D&D. I already run D&D. I already know it backwards and forwards. I like D&D. I like the system. Anything that I don't like about the system, or that I think could be improved, I can fix myself. I don't need to learn a whole nother game to do that. And if I were going to learn another game or run or play another game, it wouldn't be a D&D clone. I'd do something different. Pathfinder, the original Pathfinder, was built on the D&D 3.5 system. I don't know about the new one. From what I looked at it a little bit, it looks like it's a combination of Pathfinder and 5th edition. And it's like, why play a game that's based on D&D 3.5 and pulls in things from 5th edition when I can just play 5th edition? Like, why shop at Kmart when I can shop at Target? No. Okay, that's probably not a fair analogy. I probably just offended a bunch of people. But anyway, my point is if I'm going to try another game, it's not going to be a D&D clone. It's not going to be another fantasy RPG. It's going to be something that can do something that D&D can't do. Because if I'm going to play a fantasy RPG, I'll just play D&D. I already know it inside and out. I've already built a world for it. It'd just be crazy to do something else. And I enjoy it. It'd be different if I had a million gripes with 5th edition, but I don't. I have very few. And the ones that I do have, I've pretty much already addressed. So something like Numenera is attractive to me because it's a whole different genre. It's science fantasy. It's a different kind of gameplay than D&D, and it scratches a different itch for me. There are ideas I have for adventures that they're just Numenera adventures. It's like, I could do it in D&D, but it'd be so much better in Numenera. Why would I do it in D&D? So, for me to really be attracted to a new game or a different game, it's got to be A, something different from what I'm already doing, and B, something I'm really interested in that's worth the investment of time to learn this new game and be able to run it effectively, which, as you know, listening to the show, I'm sure it takes a lot of time and energy and work. And I've already put so much into this game that I feel pretty comfortable. Most rules I can just say it to you. I don't even need to look it up. And if I do need to look it up, I know exactly where it is. So it makes running the game really easy. So, to learn a new game like Pathfinder's new game, or one of the listeners GMs was talking on the forum about Fantasy Flight's fantasy game. It's like, I'm really not interested. I'm not saying it's a bad game. I'm not saying it's not a great game. I'm just not personally interested. I mean, there's so many games out there. You can't play them all. You can't run them all. So you got to choose your battles. You got to choose what works for you, what you like. But we're all going to choose different things. And I don't want this just to be a show for people that like D&D. So I'm really happy that John and others that I hear from find this valuable, even if they're not personally running or playing D&D. All right, so John goes on to say, I like the DMG readings, the Xanathar's Guide information, interviews, discussions, Primordia design, and behind the screen stuff. In fact, I just bought a copy of Xanathar's Guide today based on your discussion of the contents and other things. So I guess John is running or playing D&D because he's interested in the D&D specific stuff and he got Xanathar's Guide. But yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you like all those things. I'm definitely going to keep doing the DMG stuff. I enjoy it. I hear from people all the time that enjoy it. And I hear actually fairly often from people wanting me to do that with other books. I think Xanathar's Guide would be a great thing to do that with. I think Volo's Guide would be a great thing to do that with. The Mordenkainen's whatever that's coming out soon would be a great thing to do that with. I've had people suggest doing it with like Tomb of Annihilation. That I don't so much know about, especially going through page by page. I think that would be dreadfully boring. But I did actually talk a little bit about Tomb of Annihilation as far as some things going on in that adventure that I particularly liked or like. Or actually, you know what? I'm thinking of my Storm King's Thunder. I did 2 episodes of Storm King's Thunder. I did the actual review. And then before that, I did an episode where I just talked about my first impressions. And in that episode, I talked about some of the things that they did in the adventure, some of the innovations that I particularly liked. But I've done reviews of Curse of Strahd. I did Tyranny of Dragons on the blog. I did a review of Storm King's Thunder, Tomb of Annihilation, and Tales from the Yawning Portal. So you can check those out. And you can listen to all those now for free without being a patron. So how cool is that? So I will link all of those in the show notes so you can find those easily. But really quickly, in episode 111, I reviewed Curse of Strahd. In episode 123, I gave my first impressions of Storm King's Thunder. In episode 126, I reviewed Storm King's Thunder. I reviewed Volo's Guide in episode 135. I reviewed Tales from the Yawning Portal in episode 153. And I've discussed Xanathar's Guide in episodes 188, 189, and 192. That should keep you busy for a while. All right. So John says that he's not listening to the actual plays and he's not interested in them, which is fine. I'm actually not much of a fan of actual plays myself. I can take them in very small doses, but I personally find listening or watching people play D&D almost always mind-numbingly boring. I'd much rather play D&D myself or do something else. But a lot of people like it. So I produce them for people that enjoy that. And also as a teaching tool for people to learn by example. This is how one GM does things, but I'm definitely, my feelings are not hurt by listeners who skip the actual play, because I myself am not a huge fan of actual play. So I totally get it. However, John says, I do like the behind the screens episodes. I think you've done a great job of covering the topic so far. Not having heard the actual plays, I can still get 100% out of the behind the screen episodes. Even without the actual plays, hearing what you focused on planning wise, or even how things went versus how they were planned is really cool. And I can encourage you to continue them. So thank you, John. That's awesome to hear, because that's something I wonder about is, are the behind the screen episodes useful to people who aren't paying attention to the actual play? So it's really great to hear that they are. John says, I think the only criticism I would give you, oh boy, here we go. All right, I'm going to put on my thick skin. All right, I'm ready. Regarding the show, is to not second guess yourself. In many of your episodes, I hear you apologizing for explaining things or going over topics, etc., and there's no reason to. You are doing a great job. Don't apologize for doing what you're doing. Only apologize if you've made a mistake. John, I'm really sorry about that, man. I'm sorry I'm apologizing too much. See what I did there? No, but seriously, this is funny. I don't realize that I do this, but this is not the first time I've heard from a listener GM who says, Lex, quit apologizing, quit second guessing yourself, quit giving all the qualifications. So yeah, I'll try to rein it in. I don't think I realize I'm doing it. I just try to be humble. And I guess for me, a big thing is I'm on here by myself most of the time. So I'm afraid that it's really easy for me to come across as this is the only way. Like, this is my opinion. And if you disagree with my opinion, you're wrong. This is the way I run my game. If you don't run your game this way, you're wrong. Because I don't have someone else on here to disagree with me or to call me on my shit or anything like that. So that's probably part of why I, qualify things so much. And because I really want people to understand that this is just my point of view. A lot of these things, it's not so much a question of right or wrong. It's just, what works best for you. But, even things that are a question of right or wrong, I could be wrong. I don't know. If I'm wrong, I probably don't know it, right? Because I wouldn't tell you something wrong on purpose. But yeah, I'm sure that it can get annoying if it's overdone. So I will try to avoid second guessing myself so much. John goes on to say, for funding feedback, I do think that a big Kickstarter might not be worth your time. Yeah, my research into it has shown so far that it wouldn't be, unfortunately. I would be interested in Primordia campaign info, though, but more in the way that Matt Colville talked about publishing his campaign in episode 209, which is to say, not so much, here's the map, here are the rulers, here are the nations kind of things, but more like, what are the rules on your mystery cults? What are the domains you've created? And things like that. I think putting those together as low-cost PDFs that you sell on your site might work really well. So that's awesome, because that's basically what I've decided to do. So yeah, I'm trying to focus more on things that will be useful to the most amount, if I could talk straight, the largest number of people possible. So, if I put out something specific to Primordia, that's really only interesting to people who are interested in Primordia, or maybe want to use Primordia for their campaign setting. Not a whole lot of use to everyone else, but something like my Relic supplement, for instance, is something that I think would be useful to any GM running D&D, and even any GM running any fantasy game, because the concept could easily be applied to a different system. Maybe even a non-fantasy game. I don't know. You could probably figure out a way to make it work with about any game. But definitely anyone running D&D, I think will find a lot of use out of it. And it doesn't matter if they're running canned adventures or their own adventures. It doesn't matter what setting they're using or anything like that. That it'll work for anything. So that's what I'm focusing on, that kind of content. And, like John is saying, using stuff that I homebrew for my game to inspire and to fill supplements that I can release to you that will be smaller, less expensive, and that I can turn over more quickly. And, instead of having one huge project that I do that year, I can put out numerous smaller things. So the Trickster's Labyrinth, my adventure, was kind of my first dipping my toe into publishing to kind of see how it would do, how much time would it take? How much work would it be? How much would it actually make? Do I think it's worth it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now this new supplement, Relics of Power, is, my first attempt with this new idea of, hey, let's do smaller things that we can put out more frequently. Let's see how that does. Let's see how it does with a lower price point than what the Trickster's Labyrinth has. Let's see if I can make up for the amount I'm getting per copy with volume and that kind of stuff. So this is all like testing the waters to see how things work. But if Relics of Power does well, there'll be more supplements like this. And, I'd love to get to the point where I'm putting one of these out every month or two. And I think that's an achievable goal if they sell well. So, really the best way that you can support this, if you want to see more published stuff from me, is go buy Relics of Power. And while you're at it, buy one for a friend, buy one for everybody. I don't know. The more of them I sell, the more encouragement I feel, and the more motivated I am to do the next thing. And the more likely that becomes. So John goes on to say, if though you decided to do a Kickstarter for podcast support as well as various book or PDF products, I would support that at one level or another. In that case, I would suggest making the section on podcast support have a clear focus. For example, raising money for various things. So yeah, the Matt Colville's Kickstarter he just did was inspiring to a lot of people in a lot of ways, and to me as well. And one thing that it showed me is that something like this could work. I don't remember seeing something like this before. I'd never thought of it. The idea of, hey, I could kickstart some RPG product and the podcast at the same time, like what he did with his Strongholds and Followers book, as well as supporting a studio in which to produce live streams and actual play videos. So yeah, that's something I'm thinking about, because I am approaching this point with the podcast where I'm going to have to upgrade some equipment, and it's going to cost a lot of money I don't have. So I'm going to put it off as long as I can, but when that time comes, I'm going to have to do a Kickstarter because I can't afford this stuff on my own. And, it'll be a thing of, if the Kickstarter funds, then I can get these things and I can make these improvements to the show. And if the Kickstarter doesn't fund, then I can't get these things. And depending how long I wait, it might be a thing of I can't do the show anymore because my computer won't handle it anymore. I'm not to that point yet, but yeah. So just to give you an idea, because I think sometimes people don't know or don't understand what's involved in producing a podcast and the actual plays and the stuff I do. Because John mentioned all kinds of things here, like microphones and stuff like that. I'm actually, when it comes to the basic equipment, I'm pretty set. I've got 3 really nice microphones. I only ever use 2 of them, and I rarely actually use 2 of them. But I have 3 really nice microphones. I have a really nice mixer. So as far as my audio hardware, I have a nice digital recorder. As far as my audio hardware, I'm pretty good. There are some gadgets I'd like to get that would make things easier or sound a little better, but they're not necessary. As far as things that I really need in the near future, it's my computer. I use my computer to edit and process the podcast and the videos. I use it to run my games. I use it to shoot the videos. I use webcams to shoot the videos. So the computer is really the heart of Star Walker Studios productions. And I built this computer myself years ago. At the time I built it, it was a top end gaming computer, but that was, probably getting close to 10 years ago now. So it's outdated. It's getting slow. The video has always been an issue. It always takes forever to process videos and things like that. But now even a lot of the audio processing I'm doing is taking longer and longer as the software gets more sophisticated and requires more resources. Luckily, I did build this computer myself, and I know how to build computers, so I don't have to go buy a brand new computer. I don't have to go buy a Dell or an Alienware, or God forbid a Mac. Don't even get me started. I don't have to do that. So it's not as bad as it could be. Really, all I need is a new CPU, a central processing unit, the chip, which is the brain of your computer and is where a lot of your speed and processing power comes from. So I need a new CPU. I haven't priced them recently, but just going on by memory, I think you're talking at least $700, probably closer to $1,000 for a CPU, like what I would need. While I'm getting a new CPU, I could really use a new motherboard. The motherboard is the kind of the skeleton of your computer, if you will. It's what all the other components plug into. It makes everything talk to each other. It's where your USB ports are. I really need a new motherboard for USB 3.0, which would greatly increase the speed of file transfers when I'm transferring files from my digital recorder to the computer or from computer to computer and things like that. It would really help with that. Also, as part of the new motherboard or as a separate component, I need a better sound card so that I can have better audio interface into my computer, better communication between my mixer and my computer and the other audio hardware I have. And I possibly might need a new GPU or graphics processing unit or graphics card. I have a pretty good graphics card on my computer now. I don't game on it anymore. It's not good enough to game on, I don't think. But the GPU is used for video processing. So that's something I'd have to research if it would be worth the money to get a new GPU or not, because they're really expensive too. And I mean, I'd have to see a pretty significant increase in performance to warrant spending that kind of money, because I don't game on my computer. It'd be different if I gamed on it, then it'd be more worth it. So those are the things I need. I need a CPU. I need a new motherboard and or new sound card, and maybe a new GPU. And then there are other things that I might like to have. These are things that I either don't need or I'm not sure if I need. They're just things that I would like to have that would increase my capabilities and what I could do. I'd kind of like to have a green screen for the video so I could have something behind me other than just a wall. I need a shock mount for my microphone, which are way more expensive than you think they should be. But it's just a mount. What do you call it? It holds your microphone and attaches it to the microphone stand, but it isolates it. So if I bump my desk or something like that, you don't hear that. That'd be super nice to have. I need a better boom stand for my microphone that can move around better than the one I have. And then software, I use XSplit for streaming. I could look into, if I had more funds, I could look into maybe getting the licensed version. I use the free version right now. And I do know with the licensed version, you get some more features. Among them, you can stream and record in 1080p HD instead of 720p. Not sure if it'd be worth it. That's something I'd have to research, because if the only thing I get for it is 1080 instead of 720, I don't think it's worth it, because it's like a monthly fee I would have to pay for that license. Because honestly, I think 720p is good enough for tabletop RPG streams, but there's probably other bells and whistles I'd get with that license as well. So that's something I'd have to research. So that's a possibility. Another possibility could be some kind of conferencing software like GoToMeeting that I could use for my actual plays instead of Hangouts or Discord. Something like that could probably be a better solution and could get better performance and stuff like that. But again, that's something that would have a monthly fee, where, Hangouts and Discord are free. And then another possibility as far as software might be something like Fantasy Grounds. If I get to a point where I want to use a virtual tabletop, I've used Roll20 a lot, which is a free option. But I hear good things about Fantasy Grounds, and the main downside to Fantasy Grounds, in my opinion, is just the cost associated with it. You have to pay a monthly or a pretty steep one-time fee to use it. Unless you get the ultimate thing, your players have to pay to use it. And then you also have to pay piecemeal for every little thing you want to use in it, like the player's handbook or the dungeon master's guide or whatever. So it gets pretty expensive pretty quick. Definitely something I couldn't afford myself, or even if I couldn't justify spending money on that myself. But that could be something I could do in a Kickstarter to raise the money to do that for a year or whatever. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I have a few things as far as hardware that I'm going to need in the near future. And then some other things that would be nice to have that I don't need, that if I did a Kickstarter could work maybe as like stretch goal kind of things. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And yeah, if I could do some kind of combination with some kind of RPG thing, that might be a cool thing to do. I don't know. All right. So John goes on to say that he likes the new forum better than Google+. He thinks it'll do a good job of letting us find things and getting back to things we want to review again from the past. Yeah, I completely agree. He says Google Plus seemed to make everything here and then gone. Yes, exactly. It's a huge problem with Google Plus or like a Facebook group. Is it's really only good for seeing, what someone posted today. Trying to find something someone posted 6 months ago, forget it. But a forum works really well for that. So, yeah, I'm digging our new forum too. And I hope more people use it. We've been having a lot of fun on there. So, okay. So John asked about the Homebrew Campaign section. So I have a section of the forum for people to post stuff about their homebrew worlds and stuff like that. And I get questions all the time from people about what they can and can't post there. John's question, it has to do with he's using things from published sources. So just as kind of to try to answer all these questions at once, as far as what you can post there, it's really a place for you to post things about your homebrewed world. So I would ask that you only make one thread. Like for instance, if I'm going to go on there and post a bunch of stuff about Primordia, I just make one thread about Primordia. I don't start 6 different threads about Primordia. But as far as, if it's something you homebrewed for your world, I'd say post it. It's relevant. The whole idea is just a place for us to share with other GMs what we're doing. And it can just be a way to be like, hey, look at this cool thing I made. Or it can be something where another GM might like something you came up with and use it in their campaign. So it's just a way for us to share ideas. So as long as it's relevant, the sky's the limit as far as what you can post there. Now, when it comes to posting other people's material, I would ask that you observe the law and not do things that are illegal. I'm not an attorney. I can't give you really legal advice about, what you can and can't post. But, I will say if you're posting something from someone else, you should reference it. You should tell us, give us a reference so that we can go find the source, whether that's a link or published information about a book or whatever. And keep in mind fair use. I mean, you're allowed to comment on things for fair use or discuss things. So if you want to, post a rule from a game or something for discussion, like that's fine, but don't be, copy pasting whole sections from books or web pages onto our forum, because it's kind of crossing the line. So yeah, the majority of what you're posting should be your work. If you occasionally, want to pull in something as an example or to illustrate something, you can do so. And also remember, it's a forum. You can just post a link. So, if you're wanting to reference something from, I don't know, somebody's website or their blog or something, just post a link to it. You don't have to plagiarize their blog or copy paste stuff from their blog. Just post a link to the post that's relevant. And then that covers your butt. And I'm not saying John's doing any of those things. I'm just using this as an opportunity to kind of address this wider topic, because I get questions about this kind of stuff all the time. And also, John made a post on our forum. He's got a lot of D&D and other RPG stuff that he wants to get rid of, kind of garage sale kind of stuff. So go check that out. There's a ton of stuff on there, a ton of games. And he's just wanting to get rid of a lot of his old RPG stuff. And I think he's asking pretty fair prices for stuff. And I believe he's even donating some of what he makes from that to Star Walker Studios, which is super awesome. So check that out. I might check that out myself. I've been trying to think if there's any books from previous editions I'd really like to have to see if he has those. So yeah, check that out on our forum. You can find a link in the show notes at starwalkersheroes.com. All right. And I got an email from Brett. This is a different Brett, not the Brett that's been on the show that is in my campaign. Different Brett says, "Hey Lex, just one voice I'll admit, but I'd back a Primordia Kickstarter or buy supplements standalone. Seems worthwhile to try releasing small things standalone first to judge the stomach of your audience to actually buy things before you go all in on a Kickstarter or a larger project. Yeah, I totally agree. For the Relic supplement, I like the idea that you build the abilities of the relics as your players develop their characters. I'd really like to see the sections in the supplement on your players' relics fleshed out with why you added the abilities you did. It's always the view behind the thought process that is most useful to me." So that's a really cool idea. And that's something I forgot to mention when I was talking about the relics earlier on the show today. As part of the 12 example relics that I give you, 6 of those are relics from my campaign I'm running right now that I've given the player characters. And those are only developed up to, I think, level 5 at this point, because as Brett mentions here, I am doing these as we go. I didn't sit down before we started the campaign and figure out what these relics are going to look like at 20th level, because I don't know what these player characters are going to look like at 20th level. All I figured out was what they look like right now. And then as I get to each point, I decide what their new powers will be based on, how the characters developed at that point. So it allows me to tailor this item to the character as we go through the campaign. So because of that, I couldn't, in the Relics of Power supplement, tell you this is what these guys are going to look like at 20th level, because I don't know, because I haven't designed it yet. So what I did is I put them in there as they are right now at level 5. And what I'm going to do, and I think this will be fun. Well, it's not going to be fun for me and Nikki that have to edit the document, but it'll be fun for you guys, is what I'm going to do is as I improve these items throughout the campaign, I will update the Relics supplement with those improvements. So if you go and buy Relics right now and you look at or Relics of Power, I should say right now, and you go look at the Hinterlands of Elandria Relics, they only go up to level 5. So if you're going to use them in your game and you get past level 5 before we do, you'll have to come up with your own thing for what they do, which you should do anyway, because one of the wondrous things about relics is you can customize them to the particular player character. But in the future, when the player characters gain levels and I add more abilities to their relics, I will update that document. And if you bought one, you will get an email saying, "Hey, there's a new version." You'll be able to download the new version and it will have the new stuff. So, might take the relics up to level 10 or whatever. And I just the other weekend, upgraded them again. This is the 3rd or 4th time I've added new abilities to the relics in the campaign. So I think that will be really fun, especially for those of you that get this supplement earlier. You'll kind of get updates every now and then, and these items will get more and more abilities. So it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, so to speak. So, Brett's idea here of me talking about, why I gave them the different powers at the different times, sounds like a great thing to talk about in our next Behind the Screen. So I will try to remember to do that. All right. So back to Brett's email. He goes, "Anyway, keep it up, man. Your podcast is unique in its mix of scripting and improvised content and Lex opinions that are always emphatic, even when I disagree vehemently." Lex opinions. I like that. The unique mix fits me really well. I'm a fan of it. You know what? I've heard this more than once from a listener GM who says, "I really value your opinions, even when I disagree with them strongly." You know what? I think I've said this before, but I want to say it again to Brett and everyone else who has this thought. If you hear me say something on the show and you disagree strongly with what I say, let me know, man. Shoot me an email. Tell me what I said, what you disagree with, why you disagree with it. Explain your position to me. And I may share it on the show because, again, I'm on here all by myself most of the time. And so just the nature of the beast, everything's from my point of view, right? But my point of view isn't the only one. My opinion isn't the only valid opinion out there. It's maybe not even the best opinion or the best way to do something. So, if you hear me say something with it or say something that you disagree with, let me know. I'd love to talk about it and say, hey, in episode X, I said Y, and Brett here disagrees, and this is what Brett has to say about it. And, even if I don't agree with you, if I think what you say makes sense and I think it has value, I will share it anyway. I've before on this show shared points of view that I don't personally agree with, but that I think are valid, because a lot of this stuff, there's not one right answer. So even though I disagree with you and what you're saying wouldn't work for me personally, that doesn't mean it won't work for someone else. And I want to share stuff like that. So Brett and everyone else, if you disagree with something I say, and it's something that you think you have a different perspective on that would be helpful to other GMs, shoot me an email, let me know. And I'd love to talk about it on the show, or you can call my voicemail if you're more comfortable doing that. I'll give the number at the end of the show, or you can find it in the show notes and you can leave a message. Or, if it's something you really have a lot to say about, maybe you can come on the show and we can have a discussion or a debate about it. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And finally, Brett says that my call for behind the screen questions didn't fall on deaf ears, and he's working on some. So that's great. I look forward to receiving those. All right. So speaking of the voicemail, every once in a blue moon, I do get voicemail, and whenever I can, and it's relevant, I like to share those messages with you. So listener GM Tom called into the show, and let's listen to what Tom has to say.
Hey Lex, it's Tom Erickson, a longtime listener. I was just listening to the GMJ 217. Enjoyed it quite a bit. I guess I would say like the part where the conversation like devolves into what that NPC that you were assigning an actor to, what television show he was from. Like I was really ready to get into the RPG session, and then it was just like segued off into that, and I know you said you edited it, so edit that out. But otherwise, I love almost everything you do. In particular, when you went through the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide, it was kind of almost like an audio book with commentary of the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide, which was great for me because I was road tripping from New Orleans to Wisconsin at the time, and then I don't know if you ever have any intention of doing Tomb of Foes or Xanathar's Guide in 5e to any of that, or even if it was just like a chapter you thought was interesting. I would be all about that. Obviously not all of the random tables, but maybe like a jam session where you're just talking about, it's like this magic item, and like maybe this is how I'd use it in the campaign. I would personally really enjoy. I love your stuff. I'm at Gen Con every year. I run the Lego booth, Bricks and Boards. If you ever want to stop by and get some Legos and shake my hand, love to meet you. All right, have a good one.
Thank you so much for that voicemail, Tom. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you love the show. Thanks so much for calling in. I'm going to go all out of order, but there are a few things there that you mentioned that I wanted to talk about. First of all, Gen Con. I used to live in Indiana, man. So going to Gen Con used to be a lot easier than it is now. I'm in Bellingham, Washington. But if I ever get out there again, I will definitely look you up at the Lego table. Oh my God, I love Legos, and I could talk about Legos for an hour, but I won't do that. So I apologize, sir, and to everyone else who had similar feelings. Tom was talking about one of the recent actual plays, and it was actually episode 217, which was the vignette of Fear in Alondria. And what Tom's talking about here is we were coming up with a non-player character that was going to be with the party. And I was kind of talking with the player, Danielle, about the character, and we were kind of coming up with the character right there. And a trick that I use, and I know a lot of GMs do this, and I've talked about it on the show, when it comes to characterizing an NPC, is I cast the NPC, which is to say, I think of an actor, or even more specifically, I think of an actor in a certain role in either a movie or a TV show or whatever, and I use that as an inspiration for the NPC as far as it could be how they look, like what their physical appearance is, how they talk, what their personality is like, and things like that. And I just use that as a very quick way to characterize an NPC and try to make them seem more like a three-dimensional character. So I apologize that kicked you out of the episode or out of the adventure as we discussed this particular actor and characters he played. And it's funny that this came up, and I'm glad this came up. I'm glad Tom brought this up because this is something I deliberated on when I was editing, whether to cut that out or not. And I decided to leave it in, and I'll tell you why. First of all, it was a vignette, which in my mind is a little bit different than our actual game session. You might notice when you listen or watch the preludes and the vignettes that it's a little more out of character, I guess you could say, than the regular sessions. And that just kind of comes from how I came into this whole concept of doing a prelude, which came from running White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade and Changeling the Dreaming, which is where I got this idea of doing a prelude. And, in those games, the preludes were very different from a normal game session. You didn't go through them scene by scene. You didn't roll dice. You didn't even necessarily do things in character. It was more of a conversation with the player, almost like a montage kind of thing where you're working out things that happen to them before the adventure starts. And it's much more just a back and forth conversation with the player than it is like a normal role-playing session. And so that's how I approach my preludes. That's how I tend to approach these vignettes too. You'll notice that with Brett's vignette that we did with Wall, where there are parts where it's kind of, we're in character, but a lot of it's more out of character, discussing the character and stuff like that. So that's part of it. If it were the actual game session, I would have been more likely to cut that out than I was in the vignette. But really the reason I decided to leave it in is because, and I may be wrong in this, and if I am, feel free to tell me, or if you think I am. But in my mind, this actual play to me is more a tool for me to show other GMs what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, why I'm doing it, for you to take from that what you will and apply it to your own games. It's more that for me than it is entertainment. In my mind, number one, this is to help GMs become better GMs. And number two is to be entertaining. Now, if my primary goal was for it to be entertainment, then I probably would have cut that out because it's not in world, it's not in character, it's not in story. It does break the fourth wall. It does, for people like Tom may kick you out of the story. So if I were just thinking of this as a form of entertainment, I would definitely cut that out. But because I do want this to be instructional or a tool, I decided to leave it in because I thought, hey, this kind of shows a GM, how I'm kind of coming up with it. Because I didn't have any thoughts about that character before we had that conversation. So I literally was in real time coming up with that stuff as you heard it. So I thought it would be helpful to hear how I do that. Maybe that'll help you. I don't know. So I do apologize to people if, that kind of ruined it for you or made it less good. But that's kind of the reasoning behind why I did that. It wasn't something I overlooked. It was a conscious choice to leave that in there. So again, if you disagree, if you think that's not the way I should be doing it, let me know. If I hear from a bunch of people that don't want to hear that crap, then I can start cutting it out. But I personally, I think it's useful. And it's also, when you're playing the game, for most of us, I think, that's what a game session is like, right? You're not always 100% in world all the time. And, I kind of had the design or the production choice of, do I want to edit this to death and try to make it as much like you're listening to an audio drama as I can? Or do I want to leave some of that side stuff in to make it feel more like you're with us during our game session? And I try to find a middle ground where if it's completely off topic, I cut it out. But if I think it's relevant or I think it's entertaining, I'll leave it in. So, that there's countless judgment calls I have to make all the time on that. So if you have an opinion one way or another, I'd love to hear from you to help me gauge if I'm hitting the mark or not, if I need to adjust or not. So I know at least for Tom, he'd rather not hear that stuff. So that's good to know. And then Tom talks about the Player's Handbook and DMG episodes and how he enjoys those and suggests doing something similar with books like Tome of Foes, Xanathar's Guide, Volo's Guide. And yeah, I'm all over that. I'd love to do that. I really enjoy doing those episodes myself. I learn a lot from them myself. I learn a lot doing them. I find things that I forgot or overlooked in the books. And then I learn a lot as I'm editing and listening to the episode myself later, hearing this stuff again, it helps reinforce it to me. It helps me remember rules and play because I'm like, oh, I remember talking about that on the podcast. It helps me have confidence, when a player or if I'm playing the DM is like, are you sure that's the way it works? I can be like, yeah, I'm totally sure because I just talked about it on the podcast and I remember instead of being like, well, I'm not sure. I better look it up. So they're valuable to me for those reasons. And I just enjoy doing them. And I'd be all about giving a similar treatment to Xanathar's Guide, Volo's Guide, Tome of Foes when it comes out. So yeah, I just got to crank out those DMG episodes because we just got to chapter 4 of the DMG and we've got a long way to go to get through the DMG. Some other things I'd like to discuss in a similar vein on the show is the Sage Advice compendium. I'd love to go through that on the show. There's a lot of great stuff on that. I'd also love to do kind of a commentary on some of the discussions Jeremy Crawford's had on the Sage Advice segment of the Dragon Talk D&D podcast. Obviously you can just go listen to Jeremy and get it from the horse's mouth, but some of the stuff he talks about, I'd have some of my own things to say about that. And there's great stuff in those segments as well. So that's other stuff I'd love to talk about on the show. Thing is just time, I could do this show every day now. For a long time, that wasn't the case, but these days I have so many things I want to do. I could produce this show 5 days a week, 7 days a week, easy. And I'd love to do it. I just don't have the time to do it. So who knows, maybe, if the supplements I'm putting out do really well, that'll help. And maybe if I can do some kind of Kickstarter or something, that could be a thing of the Kickstarter, right? Like when we hit different stretch goals, I can say, hey, now Game Master's Journey will be twice a week or 3 times a week or whatever. And if I did it more often, maybe these episodes wouldn't be so ungodly long. But yeah, there's a million things I'd love to do. I'd love to do the show every day. So that's something else I'd love to hear from you. How much Game Master's Journey can you stomach? Because I've noticed when I release 2 episodes a week, I always get fewer downloads per episode than when I do 1 episode a week. So that tells me that there's at least a segment of my listeners that can't handle or don't want more than 1 episode a week. They just can't keep up. So that'd be a good thing to know is how many of you out there would listen to Game Master's Journey 5 times a week, 3 times a week, twice a week, 7 times a week? What's your limit? What if you could just make a wish and have Game Master's Journey however often you wanted it? What would you want? Let me know. Because it could be that I'm the only one that wants it every day. And if that's the case, I'll just forget about it. But if there's a lot of people that are like, hey, if you could do a half hour or 45-minute show every day, I'd be all over that. Then, maybe that's something we can make happen with a Kickstarter or something. I'd love to do it. All right. Well, wow, this episode is getting long in the tooth, but I have gotten through all of the feedback and whatnot that I wanted to get through today. Thank you to everyone who's written in or called into the show. I really appreciate it, and I hope to hear from you again, and I hope to hear from more of you in the future. All right, well, that is going to wrap it up for episode 220 of Game Master's Journey. If you'd like to get a hold of me, there are a lot of great ways for you to do so. You can email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @Lex Starwalker, and you can call my voicemail 951-GMJ-LEX1. That's 951-465-5391. If you have comments, questions, or feedback on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can find the show notes for this and all the episodes at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Masters Journey, as well as links to connect with the Game Masters Journey community on our forum, Google+, and Discord, where you can share ideas, questions, and stories with other listener GMs. And also, I will remind you, there are many, many more episodes available on the website than what's in your podcast feed, going all the way back to episode 58. And probably, honestly, by the time you're listening to this, even further back than that. And eventually, it'll go all the way back to episode 1, and then we'll go through all of GM Intrusions. So many hours of stuff for you to listen to. If you enjoy Game Master's Journey and you'd like to help support the show, you can find all the great ways to do so at starwalkerstudios.com/support. I've even got some options for you that don't cost any money. The best way you can support the show and my RPG endeavors is to check out my latest self-published D&D supplement, Relics of Power. If you'd like to show off your support for Game Master's Journey, you can also get a Game Master's Journey t-shirt. However you decide to support the show, I really, really appreciate it. I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I hope you have a chance to run your favorite RPG. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music, courtesy of Cloudwalker, Transboy, Renfield, Stanko, and Ish. See the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.